Okay, I've slightly changed my talk from what's in the program, and I'm going to introduce mostly chronologically, and I'm going to start with a little story of how I became a body architect. And I was living in London. I lived here for 5 years. I'm now based in Amsterdam, and I went for a job at Philips Design in Eindhoven to be part of this far future design research program, which was looking 15 to 20 years into the future. And I went into the HR department and sat down, and straight away his name was Rude. And so he said, tell me, who are you? What are you? And as soon as he asked that question, he kind of gestured and caressed this whiteboard, and he was like, are you a product designer? Are you an interaction designer? Are you a graphic designer? Are you a communication? And I was sort of like wafting my hands around in the air, I trained as a classical ballerina. I've worked in architecture for 5 years. I've done some work in fashion. I'm a hybrid. And he was like, I'm sorry, in order for us to hire you, we need to know who you are or what you are. So I walked away and rang this guy, Clive Van Heerden, and I was like, didn't get the job. He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, I don't know who I am. He's like, okay, that's bullshit. Go back next week and tell them you're a body architect. And I was like, okay. Went back next week to Rude, sat down. I've come to tell you what I am. Okay, I'm a body architect. And he was like, great, here's the papers, you start on Monday. So the following week, this is me rolling around inside a Swiss ball, inside a Lycra sack. And this was the inspiration for this dress, which is called the Barbelle. And this was a dress that blushed with light according to whether you were feeling aroused or excited or anxious. And the way that we approached projects at Philips was looking at trends. So we looked at plastic surgery, tattoos, silicone implants, tribal scarring, jewellery adornment. And we were really basing the start of the project on skin. So we looked at skin, it's the largest sexual organ. We looked at skin as a sensor, and then we also started looking underneath the skin. So the idea of electronic suppositories or magnetic ink that can be implanted underneath the skin. And we were experimenting with this concept of digital draping. So we were projecting grids and landscapes or gradients onto the body and trying to understand where the best place is to place technology, because we were putting knitting electrodes into textiles. And if you're thinking about the body, then of course you've got to think about the near environment. So for example, we were thinking about what happens when you sit in a car and what's happening between your body and the car seat, or your body and the car, or what's happening between the person, between you and who's sitting next to you. So what we were trying to understand was the idea of how can you sense emotions, and for example, what happens to your body when you kiss someone for the first time or when you brush past a stranger, and trying to understand on a biological level what's going on. So we were basically creating art for Philips. They were using them as marketing tools, and it was almost like taking technology and using technology as a way of extending the body. This was a stick-on sensor which sensed sleep and stress. And then we also looked at, implant technology. This was a Philips research technology, which was a magnetic ink that when you rotate it 180 degrees, then the tattoo is revealed underneath the skin, augmented by touch. And it was here where I met my friend Bart Hess. And we started collaborating together. We had very similar ideas about genetic manipulation, beauty expression. And so without us really knowing, we started to crystallise this thinking we were having at Philips. So we were having kind of really, really interesting conversations at Philips. For example, this was about the idea of plastic surgery and a monoaesthetic, and that there's a far greater growing number of plastic surgeons who are doing aesthetic surgery than actual rehabilitation. So we started thinking about the rebellion of the ugly. So every Friday we would go to very cheap shops and just use ourselves as models and experiment. And without us really knowing, we were kind of creating these low-tech approaches to the high-tech conversations we were having at Philips. And we were sort of thinking about how do humans evolve, and without being too serious, but being able to kind of create these visuals inside our head. And it was always a very playful experience. I don't know if you can see, but I'm sitting on Bart's chest in a pair of hot pants and the camera remote control, and he's standing there with his hands up in the air. And we shoot this, we shot it either in his apartment or my apartment, and it became very interesting when you saw the Spanish couple on their balcony kind of smoking, looking at our routine. Also what we were doing was looking at, how can you capture movement in a single image. We would just meet in the morning and really workshop the ideas, and then from there we would kind of mass produce the idea that we were going to do. We then started to think about what could happen if you could extrude the skin pores, for example, or if you could have a textile that could grow. And so, I don't know if you made at school the grass men with the stick-on eyeballs and the hairy head. So we wanted to create the big version of that, 1-to-1 scale. So this is 20 pairs of pantyhose stuffed with sawdust, stuffed with 170 square metres of grass seed, and we worked like farmers. It just depended on the project which kind of role we took, but for this particular one we worked like farmers. And inside the front of my living pool we blew up a child's swimming pool, and after 8 days we had grass. And after each day, because in the end we were just kind of operating on an overdrive, you always feel really weird afterwards, because it's like building a sculpture live on the body, and you usually have it on your body for about 6 hours. So this is the home hydroponics. I'm not a green thumb at all, so I was quite stressed. And then this is what it was like, Christmas, waking up and then you see all your presents. And it was really fun. I don't know if anyone's ever put on a wetsuit before. If you have, it's like that, but also if the wetsuit is a mini skirt as well, because it was, it was kind of a crazy thing. And I became very protective, so I watered the textile sausages before Bart put them on. And this collaboration, which we'd been working on for 2.5 years, really exploded, and we were lucky enough to work with Nick Knight for American Vogue, and we did a live show at the Pompidou and the Palais de Tokyo. And it was during... I'll show you that in a minute. It was during the shoot on this side. This is washing up liquid. The more expensive washing up liquid works better than the cheaper one, FYI. This is where I first started becoming interested in water, because what was happening is we were taking pictures, but this thing was moving, and the food dye was heavier than the foam, and I started to see this movement in front of me. So then I moved into video. They're things that you clean your ears with, stuck on my roommate. So I started to, just stick repeated objects or materials on my body, and I started to look at the skin as if it was an accessory, and to think about how I could give a different function or a different program to skin. And at the same time I was doing that, I met Robin, who's a Swedish musician, and she was working on her album Body Talk, and her inspiration behind the album was how can raw human emotion coexist in a digital world. And so we both kind of, we were really thinking about the same thing, and so I went on to work with her and was again still using my body to experiment of ways of creating these extensions of the body, but always in a very low-tech way. So these are from her album cover. And I guess I think I learned when I was at Philips that you don't have to actually make the technology in order to provoke it. And what I was doing was manipulating the body, and I started to think about, okay, how can I manipulate technology? And we discussed this idea of a maybe technology, and we were interested in a technology that doesn't either switch on or off, but it's maybe, so it could take the form of like a liquid or a gas, and it could shift in density a bit more like emotions, and it's always changing. And I guess that's what I'm really interested in, is like extending the body at the perimeter of the body and seeing how far I can extend it and create volume around the body. So I started again. I started again experimenting with water, and originally the idea was actually I was trying to blur the edge of my body, so I was hanging out the side of my apartment with several garden hose sprinkler systems, trying to see if I could blur the edge of my body. And it was at that point when I saw the water travelling through the tube to the end of the sprinkler that I was like, hey, I'm moving to the tubes. So this is my roommate again in my studio in Amsterdam. And the speed of the water, just previously, what you saw, the speed of the water is determined by how fast she's sucking or blowing. So I'd be standing behind my camera, this is in the red light district, saying, suck harder, good. Okay, now blow harder, good, I think we got it. So it was a lot of fun, and I showed Robin these tests, and she got really excited, and she was like, okay, I want to use this in my music video. And I was thinking, shit, how can we suck and blow on the music video? And we tried. This is 5 people sucking and blowing, and it's really disgusting because the water is basically kind of going through the tubes multiple times. There was no way we could suck or blow because we actually, had to achieve something that could be shot in a day. So what we did was piggyback existing technology. So we made a machine using drill pumps and drills, and created a little low-tech machine for the set. And the thing that happened was the record label gave us the okay 10 days before the shoot. So we had 10 days to automate the whole system, and we didn't test it before we went there. So it was a live experiment whilst we were there. So up until this point, I'd been looking at the outside of the body and how can I manipulate the outside of the skin. And then I started thinking about, okay, if I can extend it from the outside, how can I go inwards and extend it from the inside? And I was reading a comment by Ray Kurzweil, who's this utopian technologist, but I liked that he said this idea of being able to eat technology, and that we'll be able to reprogram our biology away from disease and anti-aging. So I was thinking about, okay, if you can do that, then how could you maybe reprogram or biologically enhance our immune system? And how could you change body odor, for example, because smell and pheromones is like a subliminal form of communication, and how could you manipulate that? And if you did have a technology like that, how could it change beauty products like face creams or hair shampoos? So I came up with an idea for a cosmetic pill, and I worked with a synthetic biologist in Italy, and we discussed, how we could make this pill. And he said that by using natural processes in the body breaks down fat enzymes, and we would combine a glycerol with a fragrance molecule, and the body would break it down naturally, and when you perspire, the fragrance would come through your skin. And I made a film for that.
Go beyond accessory. express uniqueness. Swallowable perfume. A new cycle of evolution.
And the next week, this happened.
There is a pill in development that would actually turn your sweat into perfume. So instead of having to spray on perfume, you could just take a pill and it would make you smell nice. Now, it's still in development. Researchers have not put this out on the market yet, but it will turn perspiration into fragrance.
Is this just for women or for both sexes?
Well, I mean, presumably if they could do it for one, they could do it for the other. If they say that we're all genetically unique, so our scented sweat would take on an individual characteristic, so you would never smell like anyone else, but you would smell better.
I like that's a cool idea. People love to pop a pill for anything in this country. That would probably do.
Anyway, they carry on. And since then, I've been getting emails, particularly from the Middle East, saying, we're really ready, we're really excited about your perfume, we're ready to distribute, when will you be ready to put this on the market? So I really wasn't expecting anyone to take it this seriously. But what it made me think was, okay, I don't have any advertising or any marketing background, but I was like, wow, if I can do that from, in my studio with all those visuals in there were soy sauce, denture tablets and yogurt. It's like, wow, that's pretty powerful. So how can I then use that for other brands? And I met Dennis, who is behind Aesop, and I'll just introduce Aesop. I think it's one of my favourite brands. They make skincare. They have 80 signature stores around the world. They work with Ilsa Crawford, Rodney Eccleston, and really the architecture of their stores really represents their brand. And we discussed doing a project together, and so he commissioned me to make a short film. And at that time I was reading about this physicist Hermann Helmholtz, how everything is an assault on the skin, and that a human being is like a rubber ball wrapped in a delicate membrane. And actually I was just at the Anatomy Museum last week in Nijmegen, and I saw this, and I was like, wow, this, I didn't even imagine that this was like this, but for me, I don't know, it made a really nice connection between the film that I'd just done and somehow, the way that we're brought into this world. And this is the film. And just, I'm going to finish off with this quote by Anthony Gormley. I just watched a TED talk of his last week. If minds live in bodies, bodies live in clothes, then in rooms, then in buildings, and then in cities, do they also have a final skin? Is that skin perceptual, the horizon? Art is trying to find out what lives beyond that horizon. And I guess that's what I'm fumbling in the dark doing as well. Thanks so much for having me.